Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Edge. Really happy to have someone I've spent some time with recently on the podcast today, Carlos Gallego. I hope I pronounced that right. It's really good to have you on. Both myself and John have met you, but I guess really for our listeners' benefit, can you give us a rundown of kind of where you started, how you got into IT, and kind of what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here. Fan of the pod, long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. I got into IT initially after graduating engineering here in Australia. I got a one-way ticket to the UK, as a lot of young Australians tend to do, and started working in the IT industry initially in digital rights management, sort of nothing to do with network security and the like. But I soon joined a startup, a wireless networking startup called Blue Socket, and I joined there with one of the co-founders. There was only two of us in Europe, so kind of wore every hat. And it felt like it was a live MBA sort of for a few years, and so I worked up from being a sales engineer to a product manager of the technology there for many years, traveling the world, which was a great experience as sort of a fairly young person in the IT industry. And then I moved back to Australia after 4 or 5 years in London. Had an idea for a software company that sort of realized with a couple of colleagues of mine. And a few years after launching that, we were acquired by Aruba Networks, which was great. And that's still where I work today, based out of Brisbane, Australia.
So what startups, because people take different paths, and startups is one of those paths. What kind of drew you to make your own company and form your own company?
Pretty much because I got told no, that I couldn't do it at the company that I was working at, which is, I think, how a lot of entrepreneurs potentially start. So this was the very early days of wireless networks, sort of think, very early 2000s. And back then, wireless networks were still very much seen as a convenience network for guest access in, coffee shops, hotels, around the place. The speeds were still pretty slow. But I think the magic of wireless was pretty compelling. People, the ability to sort of connect your laptops without any cables and the like. And so because the early days of wireless networks was a lot about sort of guest access, that was great, but there was no actual way for guests or visitors to actually get onto the network easily. It was a very clunky process of hard coding a username into the wireless controller, a very sort of insecure way of doing things if you think about it right now. And I always thought there was a better way to do it. And to be honest, I was actually looking more as a solution for myself, because, we're all guests on wireless networks at some point, during our day, during our week, whether we're traveling on the road, at a coffee shop, a hotel, as it may be. And, I sort of approached, I was a product manager, as I mentioned, at Blue Socket, and I sort of approached the powers that be to say, hey, I've got this idea to build this workflow to very easily register guests onto the network, give them temporary accounts. And they said, that's nice, Carlos, get on with your day job and stop, leave the smarts to the smart people. So I basically quit and went and did it myself with some help from some friends. It started off with very humble beginnings, kind of almost like bespoke software programming for a couple of specific customers. But as we sort of showed it to more and more people, that I'd worked with in the past, people were like, hey, this is great. I want this on, for my organization. And so, with my co-founders, we decided to sort of take the step from, bespoke software development to actually building a commercial product that, that we could sell around the world. And we did so, and it was very successful.
I guess the question is then, so you got acquired by Aruba, right? Or the company got, not you personally. I guess initially it was
Yes.
probably you in your time. But for our listeners' point of view, what does it kind of, how does that process work? Did you plan to be purchased? Did you reach out and actively try and find someone, or is it kind of secret squirrel stuff? Someone taps you on the shoulder. Like, let us give us a bit of information on that process of being acquired.
Yeah, sure. So look, we didn't have a very conventional journey, I guess. We were a startup with four friends in a garage in Brisbane, Australia, not necessarily the hotbed of Silicon Valley's technical innovation. And the product that we had integrated with all of the major wireless players that were out there. So we were kind of a value add to the Ciscos and Arubas and Trapezes of the world that added this application that actually made the wireless network useful, right? Because it could easily get guests and contractors and visitors onto there. And so it was actually more from the ground up. So the reseller channel around Europe predominantly, but also in Australia, they saw this as a differentiator when they were bidding for projects, right? So rather than just bid on margin, because everybody was bidding the same Cisco kit or the same, Aruba kit or whatever it might be, they would say, hey, not only are we selling you the wireless network, but here's this application that allows you to sort of solve one of the key use cases for it. And so channel partners were the ones that really helped bubble up the value of AmigoPod, as the company was called, up to the surface. And and soon some of the SEs and some of the technical and sales folks at these manufacturers started taking notice. They say, hey, who's this small Australian company with a Spanish name that sort of keeps popping up in deals and makes customers very happy? And so we started getting a little bit of visibility on that front. One of my colleagues as well, one of my co-founders, Cameron Esdale, he had a lot of connections from previous lives with some of the manufacturers that were all pretty much based in North America and in Silicon Valley. And so, we just pretty boldly approached them and said, hey, we're AmigoPod. We add this value to your technology, and we'd love to work closer with you to build partnership. In truth, we wanted to leverage their massive sales and marketing and channel presence, right? Because we were bootstrapped. We didn't have VC funding or anything along those lines. And so, as we sort of started getting a bit more traction in the market, and we started getting more high profile customers, and not only getting the customers, but making them very happy, and making ultimately the wireless networks more effective. They started to take notice, and so one day, so we built that up over the course of a couple of years. And then one day on a Saturday afternoon in Madrid, Spain, I was ironing my laundry, and I got a phone call from the VP of Business Development at Aruba saying, hey, come over. We want to have a conversation about doing something a bit more than just partnering with you guys. And about 6-8 weeks later, I was on a one-way ticket to San Francisco.
So did you guys, I mean, if you kind of, a lot of times an exit happens, and you don't get to really pick who it's going to be. It just sort of happens. And that seems to be the case with yours. But other times there's a bidding war that happens. And I think Aruba was a great choice for your company as opposed to some of the other vendors out there. But was there other thoughts of maybe, going with vendor Y or X or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So look, we were founded in November of 2017, and we were acquired in November of 2010. So it was a pretty it was only sort of three and a bit years. And we'd had the company, the bespoke software, for a little bit of time before that, as I mentioned. But as a company, it was sort of just over 3 years that we were in the market. And we initially didn't necessarily set out with an end game of sort of either acquisition or IPO. We were just a few guys with an idea and wanting to sort of take on the world. And funnily enough, there was a couple of other companies that we partnered with that were not wireless vendors, that were in the IPAM space and security space, but that were all about sort of connecting and securing users. And so there was a couple of there was a little bit of interest in terms of what was going on there. We actually our technology was OEM'd by Aerohive at the time as well, which was a big boost for us in terms of credibility, and I think certainly gave some of the other manufacturers a bit of pause. So we had a couple of options on that front. But ultimately, when Aruba approached us and sort of spoke to us about what they wanted to do, we still felt that our product was, really only 20-30% complete in terms of what our vision was for the actual product. And we felt that at Aruba, we were going to get the opportunity to actually, fulfill that and sort of see that through. One of the fears that we had, I guess, with potentially some of the larger organizations that were also interested, is that they would effectively just hire the people and throw away the technology, which can sometimes happen, and you sort of get lost inside a bigger organization. But Aruba was the opposite of that. We sort of had a plan from the beginning to build out the team, to expand the technology beyond the guest access and BYOD capabilities that we had. And that certainly came true. And yeah, we sort of couldn't be happier with how things panned out.
So what was the next step once you were acquired? Kind of when you get acquired, what was like the 3 months and 6 months and 9 months? How did it kind of roll out and end up kind of where you are today?
Yeah, well, I think as both of you know, the first few months are a complete whirlwind of a fire hose of suddenly this massive company sales organization wanting you to attend 1,000 meetings and conferences and presentations, which was a great place to be. And it was exhausting, don't get me wrong. But, we are also, again, you're suddenly in the middle of Silicon Valley. You're talking with all of these organizations that you only hear and read about necessarily, based out of Australia and Spain as we were at the time. And so it was very welcoming, and everybody just wanted a piece of us, right? Everybody wanted to know about the technology. And so, as I said, I wouldn't even say the first 3-6 months. I think the first 2 or 3 years were very much a whirlwind in terms of not only sort of telling the world about our story, but making sure that we had better integration and new features working with Aruba. At the time, just after we launched, was not very long since the iPad had been announced, right? So the iPhone had been announced for a while, but the iPad had just been sort of announced and brought to market. And so suddenly there was a whole lot of senior executives in finance and in other places with their shiny new toys that wanted to get onto what was then traditionally very much just a Windows only sort of a network. And our technology really facilitated, bringing those onto the network in a secure way. So it was a combination of going and telling the world about our technology, but also really diving into a lot of R&D and the possibilities of where we could take this. About a year after we were acquired, Aruba made a second acquisition of a company called Vendor Technologies, which was very much focused on enterprise radius, right? So what we were doing was much more on the guest BYOD contractor side of things. And so Aruba acquired this company called Vendor Systems, and effectively I was heading up product management and charged with taking the guest and BYOD contractor side of things, plus the sort of enterprise radius side of things, and put those things together into a product that could service across all of those sort of requirements. And that was where the product ClearPass was born, which has been a long time leader in the NAC space. Yeah,
so NAC, we should get onto that. I mean, I was a ClearPass customer back in the day. I always found, and I still find, putting people straight on the network is something that concerned me. So the concept of NAC for me was kind of one step up from configuring ACLs, or even in combination with ACLs. We're seeing a resurgence in that kind of technology at the moment because of this thing we call zero trust. Security's historically always something we've thought about after. And I've told this story before, that we never had locks on our cars for a long time until they got stolen. We never had locks on our houses, in fact, or we didn't use them. Security has always come after. For me, any form of NAC should be really implemented at the time that you implement the network. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. Networks have been around longer than that kind of technology has been around. But what are you seeing from a ClearPass point of view? Is there being a resurgence because of this talk of zero trust, or that kind of thing? Is it more interesting to people than it was before?
Yeah, look, I mean, let's take a little bit of a retroactive, I guess. So I think, both Cisco and Juniper had sort of NAC products in the, in the sort of mid 2000s, let's say. But I think back then NAC was literally just equated with 802.1x. And I believe, NAC is a lot more than that. And back then as well, supplicants on endpoints were not particularly good. It was sort of cumbersome to configure. And I think NAC got a really bad reputation because it just sort of seemed to be an inhibitor for people to actually connect to the network. And by the way, back then people were largely connecting to wired networks only, right? Still, and wireless was still very much for sort of guests and convenience and those sorts of things. But as wireless became more pervasive inside organizations, the very nature of wireless meant that people wanted to, you needed to authenticate every device onto the wireless network, right? So switch ports were still largely just open. You plugged in, you got an IP address, and away you went, and you leveraged your Active Directory, domain authentication. But, through the technologies we built in ClearPass, we actually made it very easy for people to log on to wireless networks, starting with guests and contractors and BYOD, but sort of expanding to enterprise users. And we often heard, I wish my wired network would work as easily as my wireless network and be as secure as my wireless network, which sounds a bit confusing because wireless networks weren't considered particularly secure back in the day, but everybody did authenticate to the wireless network. It wasn't an open wireless network, the same as open switch ports. So I think that, through as wireless became more pervasive, NAC started to become more relevant on the wireless side of the network, and then gradually sort of found its way back to the wired network for all of those devices and things that were still on there. So, but if, and in terms of the relation to Zero Trust, I really do think that NAC and Zero Trust are very much aligned. So, we sort of talk about the first thing you need to do is have no invisible connections from a Zero Trust network perspective, right? And part of the technology in NAC solutions, not just in ClearPass, but in NAC solutions more broadly, is the concept of profiling and visibility, right? And sort of knowing every single device that is just associated or connected to the network. Right now, connected doesn't mean you've got access to anything. It just means you've effectively got an IP address, and we know that you're a Windows laptop or a printer or an IoT widget and the like. Secondly, we authenticate every device that associates to the network. Again, so no invisible connections. And then finally, the authorization, which in many ways is the actual most important part of a NAC solution, where we take into consideration, the user, the device type, location, the posture, context that we maybe have from endpoint security solutions or from other, parts of the network and security environment. And we essentially place the user onto the network with a particular role, or sort of, a particular role that controls what they can and can't do. And we share this information with the switch, with the wireless gateway or controller, with the firewalls, so that it can then enforce whatever that, traffic steering, security, access policy may be for a given user. And I guess the final piece is, once you authenticate the user onto the network and you authorize their access, you don't just sort of stop there, right? Because devices may change their posture. There might be a compromise event. People might disconnect and then connect, in another meeting room or whatever that might be. So we're constantly sort of evaluating, has there been any change of that posture or authorization? And taking feeds in from third-party systems as well. And if there has been a change, we can reevaluate the policy and say, okay, well, now because of this change, you no longer have access, or you have more restricted access, or those kinds of things. And I think it's very, very relevant to what we're seeing today with Zero Trust as it relates to cloud applications and SaaS applications and the like, right? People just don't get unfettered access to these applications. Just because you've got a username and password that's correct shouldn't mean you just be able to connect to any kind of resource out there. So I think NAC is back. NAC is definitely back, and it's a great complement to what we're doing with SSE.
So there's
I
this
think we need
concept of
some t-shirts with that on, right? We need some t-shirts
Knack
with
is
Knack
back.
is back. But anyway, John, carry on. I'll get the t-shirts organized.
Yeah. So you will take that one. That's great. Yeah. There's also this concept of universal zero trust, or universal ZTNA as it's called. The idea basically is to take, the remote workers, the distributed applications, what's going on in your campus, and kind of meld them all together in a zero trust manner. There's a lot of work and a lot of things that have to go right to make that happen. But I'm curious, has that been a concept that you've heard? Is it something that you're actively thinking about? How do we bring this this concept of universal zero trust to the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, people, are looking to implement sort of zero trust framework and concepts, from the edge all the way to the cloud, and for users and things wherever they may be, right? So, I sort of often say to customers, just because we have this great, cloud security capabilities with SSE technology, doesn't mean that we should just allow anybody to connect to the network. Now it's like, all right, we've got this security in the cloud, so let's not bother about any kind of network security. It doesn't sort of work that way, right? You still want to make sure that you know who's plugging into a switch port or who's connecting to your enterprise Wi-Fi. You still, want to control the posture of those devices. You still want to, control east-west traffic and access on the local network and the like. So I think the sort of zero trust from a network perspective and zero trust from an application perspective, really go hand in hand. And when we talk about universal zero trust as well, I think it's important not to forget all of those things that connect to our network, right? So again, with zero trust, we tend to focus a lot about users that are behind, devices. But quite often, Internet of Things devices are less secure than your average, Windows or Mac laptop or phones or tablets or whatever. So, what we're really trying to do as well is provide that same sort of framework, independent of whether there's a user behind a device, or whether it's actually just an IoT device on itself. So we're certainly seeing customers wanting to implement a overarching strategy that takes care of all of those things that are connecting to their networks, and accessing workloads, applications, those kinds of things.
I think, to be honest, when I was a customer, that was the journey I was taking, and that was the strategy I'd set out for the 5 years. It was really deal with kind of third-party contractors and then enterprise VPN, because I saw really those as the highest risk, and I didn't like the way VPNs worked. And then it was kind of bringing that concept of ZTNA inside, bringing it in and doing server to server kind of zero trust, client to server zero trust on the LAN and WAN. And then I kind of kicked the can down the road and thought, how am I going to do IoT and OT later on?
Yeah.
Because I knew it was troublesome. I mean, I was in a global manufacturing company, so I knew it was difficult. But one of the things I think is worth noting is we talk a lot about SASE and SSE, and Gartner have created these architectures, and I stand behind them. I think they're valid. But we've said before, both myself and John, that SSE excludes on-prem. I mean, it's kind of made this assumption that everybody's gone home and there is no more LAN or WAN anymore. And I wonder if at some point it will include that concept of microsegmentation, NAC, the kind of zero trust on-prem. I wonder if it will it will start to include that, really, because people are definitely talking more about SASE, talking more about SSE. There is still confusion about what zero trust is. People still talk about ZTNA as if it's the whole of zero trust, and they kind of mix up those terms. And I think there's complication around that, and we need to talk more about what zero trust is as an architecture rather than ZTNA as a kind of product. But I'm curious, and John, maybe this question for you. Do you think at some point SSE is going to include microseg, like internal, or do you think it will be a separate magic quadrant? How do you think it will be approached in the future? Because it's still a big risk, right?
I think it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about devices accessing applications, Yeah, absolutely. It's going to include both the wired on campus and the wireless on campus, as well as the remote. It just has to. I mean, the concept here is to create simplification. You don't want a lot of complexity where you have a solution, for your campus, a solution for your remote, so on and so forth. I think where the challenge lies is once you get into the data center, and I've brought this up in the past. Inside the data center, if you have legacy applications, re-architecting those applications, adding in microsegmentation, it's a difficult proposition because the business leaders don't want to invest in there. And so there's no real strong return on investment from a dollar standpoint. There's a risk reduction, obvious case to be made. So really what it ends up being is transformation of those applications. That concept we've talked about in the past, where you treat your applications less like pets and more like cattle, and they become more ephemeral, and you move them off to the cloud. I think that's what happens in the data center. So yeah, that's kind of my stance on it. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, SSE concepts will include both that NAC on campus as well in the cloud. I think there's another conversation to be had, and I'm curious on this, Carlos, the future of wireless. So when Jay and I started our journey back in the dinosaur age, everything was wired. Everything was a switch port. And then wireless came into the mix, and it was this second-class citizen almost, until obviously, as you said, the management team got their iPads and they're like, hey, we need to have connection here, and I need to be able to do my work on this iPad thingy. And then, wireless became a pure citizen of the networking sphere. And then today, what we're starting to see is this emergence of cellular technology, 5G, and what that future holds, not only for wireless, but for, SSE and security and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of curious, as you look at the campus, and the other piece I'm going to add in here is how companies are changing their work methods. Not everyone is on the campus. Emergence of the hybrid workforce, that doesn't seem to be going away. What is the future of wireless? What does it look like if, Carlos, you're looking down the 5 years from now? What will we see on the campus, and what sort of technology should be thinking about if you're a technology leader?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and something that we get asked quite a bit. With every the founder of Aruba, Kiti Melkote, used to love saying that every time a new G was invented in the cellular world, it was supposed to be the doom of Wi-Fi. We've been hearing this since 2G, since 3G, since 4G, now with 5G. And guess what? Wireless Wi-Fi, I should say, has only just gotten stronger and stronger, and is very much the de facto connectivity mechanism today. But I tend to think of things as as wireless connectivity technologies that are sort of best fit for purpose, right? So we use Wi-Fi, 802.11 Wi-Fi sort of day in, day out, as do a lot of our home and enterprise IoT devices. But we also use a lot of other types of wireless, right? So we all use Bluetooth low energy for a lot of things. There's Zigbee, a lot of home automation, not just at home, but smart building kind of automation. And cellular has been used not just in public networks, but in private networks for a long time for a variety of different use cases, sometimes more specialized than the sort of general Wi-Fi use cases. But especially with the advent of 5G and the sort of, the architecture of that, more open architecture of 5G compared to previous versions, we really see a future where there's a multi-RAN enterprise. And what that means is that a single enterprise will have multiple radio technologies that are used by the people and by the things in that enterprise in order to, connect to applications, to transmit data, to do the sorts of things that we do depending on the industry that you're in. Now, I think where the challenge and I guess where the opportunity is how do I take those separate sort of RF or wireless technologies, but provide a more consistent sort of a data plane so that I'm still applying my security services, regardless of whether you connect via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or private cellular. And so, that's something that we're working on a lot at the moment, be able to leverage those same sort of tool sets that network administrators and security administrators have to be able to deal with effectively packets, irrespective of where they're coming from, right? And so I see the future as very bright in terms of how Wi-Fi is evolving. We've just recently Wi-Fi 6E has been sort of adopted. I think there's 2 billion citizens now have access to the 6 gigahertz band, which opens up a lot more capacity for wireless networks. And we're really seeing private cellular, and in particular private 5G sort of taking off for a certain set of use cases that Wi-Fi is just not as well suited to. So we really don't see it as a sort of as a competitive approach versus delivering the best connectivity options for whatever the application or whatever the vertical may be. So again, I think the future is bright.
Do you think that the move to kind of hybrid work, and I don't want to just say users at home, because users are everywhere. I mean, I've been on a number of planes over the last couple of weeks, and you now get pretty good Wi-Fi on planes. You now get pretty good Wi-Fi in football stadiums or concert halls, or, I mean, it's been around in hotels for a while, but you see people sitting in a Starbucks or equivalent watching movies on their machines. I mean, the movies on a plane I was on recently were delivered over Wi-Fi on a plane. I mean, those were things that you wouldn't have had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Do you think, because more people are now not in offices, is that pushing innovation? I mean, I know it's pushed innovation in regards to security. We've been forced to become more secure because our users have moved outside of that kind of castle and moat that we're familiar with. But do you think it's pushing innovation around? I don't want to necessarily say Wi-Fi, but connectivity as a whole.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think certainly, with younger generations coming through, the expectation that Wi-Fi predominantly, although just connectivity in general is there, is, it's almost more important than oxygen and water for some people, right? People, if you ask a bunch of, younger people, they might say, I'd rather stay in a worse hotel room with better Wi-Fi than a fancy hotel room with no Wi-Fi, just as a very basic sort of example. So, look, I think the entire globe is really connected. Connectivity is part of our daily lives, both in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives, right? We all use online banking. We all access health information that's sort of in the cloud. We're all on the go, and the second that you jump into an Uber, onto a bus, onto a train, people are getting their mobile phone and checking their whether it's to check their social media, browse the internet, look at stream a video, whatever that might be. So I think connectivity is now just expected, and I actually think that from an enterprise, from an end user perspective, for the non-technical users, let's say, they don't actually care whether it's Wi-Fi or 4G or 5G. They just want a great experience so that they can stream their movies or post onto social media or whatever that might be. And so as network architects and security people, what we need to do is, how do we ensure that we not only deliver that great connectivity, but that we do it in a sort of a secure manner as it relates to our enterprise access. And that's not always an easy thing to do. And certainly as users have dispersed away from the four walls of our offices and are sort of, at home, bouncing around the world, whatever that might be, it becomes more of a challenge to be able to not only have visibility of what people may be doing in terms of the enterprise network, but what's their experience, right? Like, so, you get a support call and somebody says, hey, I'm connecting to Salesforce and it's really slow and not working, and they're connected from home. How, as an IT administrator, do you sort of troubleshoot that? How do you provide a better experience on that? So and this is where I think SASE and SSE in particular provides some great tools in order to to facilitate that. But look, we're certainly spending a lot more time at home, but it doesn't mean people aren't in the offices. And again, whether people are coming into the office 2 days or 3 days or 1 day, you still need that connectivity there, right? You still need that security there. So I don't think that that's going away, But what I do think is that the sort of, the more hybrid workforce today has accelerated a lot of transformations inside organizations. So things that, before, remote connectivity was a little bit the exception rather than the rule, right? Today, remote connectivity is something that needs to be available, because at the drop of a hat, and hopefully not, we all may be told to work from home again for 3 months or whatever that might be, right? So I think that it's been a real positive in terms of accelerating people that did things maybe the older and clunkier way, which was the only options available at the time, to a sort of a more modern approach to doing things, based on SSE and SASE architectures, where security is kind of just baked in, and the end user doesn't really need to think about it. Because again, I always say to customers, don't put security decisions in the hands of non-technical, non-security people. It needs to be transparent. It needs to sort of be happening, under the covers. And as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, security can actually enhance the end user experience when done correctly.
I think one of the things that I've found when I'm talking to lots of CISOs and over the last couple of weeks is secure connectivity is in the top 3 of their priorities. It may not be number 1, there may be some other priorities, but it's definitely up there. And they don't even class security and connectivity as separate anymore. They are talking about secure connectivity in the same breath. But that leads me on to, I guess, a challenging question is, historically, security teams and network teams have not necessarily got on that well and not necessarily needed to work together on a daily basis. But we are, it seems, moving in a direction where they have to work day to day, hand in hand, whether that be from a securing the network or securing applications or whatever it might be. It's getting more important for security to be involved in every decision that anybody outside of security makes, whether that be in IT or even facilities, building security, all that kind of stuff. How do you think we are going to get those teams to work? And I know you don't have a magic wand, but how do you think we can encourage those teams to work hand in hand? Because if they don't work hand in hand, you end up with conflict. You end up with the security going, you must do this, and the network team pushing back, or the network team going off and doing something, and you end up with really an insecure environment. So what would be like your recommendation on trying to get those teams to work together, if you have one? Maybe the answer is there isn't one, but
No, I'm never short of an opinion. So look, I think that the most important thing to do is remember who the customer is. Remember who you're servicing, right? You're not servicing the network team. You're not servicing the security team. You're serving your user base, right? That's why we're doing this stuff. That's why we're trying to secure the network for the users. That's why we're trying to provide better connectivity options for the end users. I think people need to, stop thinking that it's all about what they want because they happen to like this fancy shiny new security toy from some company or the latest network Wi-Fi access point from some vendor or whatever it might be. And remember what that ultimate mission is. And look, like with a lot of things, it comes down to leadership to set the tone, to set the culture, to remind people that that is who we're servicing and that is what our objective is. End users are part of the solution, not part of the problem, and we need to work together to actually make sure that we're ultimately delivering for those end users so that they can go on and do their jobs and take care of patients if it's a healthcare environment, or service financial transactions, or build widgets in the manufacturing space that you came from. So I do think that it has to start from the top. I do think that the culture has to be set, and again, reminding people of why we're actually building this stuff in the first place, right? We're not sort of building it for our own geeky needs or interests. We're actually building it for our users.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it all comes down to user experience. I mean, we've alluded to this before on this podcast, and we've mentioned it before, that historically security has been an afterthought, and therefore any afterthought hinders generally user experience. I don't think we've ever truly implemented security with anything and it not kind of slowed down the process a bit.
Yep.
But my opinion is if we start with the mindset of security first and we bake it into whatever we're doing, then even if it does slow down the process, nobody knows it slowed down the process because you're delivering a solution rather than deliver a solution and then put security in and slow it down. But there are tools out there now that will actually can increase user kind of experience and increase security. But I think we're running out of time. I mean, we always get a bit short on time. So one last comment before we get onto the fun stuff.
Okay. So yeah, I was just going to say that I think that how can the network team show them that implementing these kind of network controls can actually enhance the security, and similarly the security team up and say, hey, look, if we go down this sort of security framework, we can actually improve the connectivity, the network, the user experience. So again, I'm a big believer that network can help security and security can help networking. Now, I'm not naive enough to not understand it's easier said than done, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
No, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a fun question, and it's rather than make it too easy, it's going to be about food and a food experience. And I know we've been together recently, and we've had some fantastic food experiences, probably like in your top 1 or 2, because I was present. But outside of my presence in our food experiences, maybe give me 2 of your kind of best food experiences. And it's not necessarily about the food, but it's about the experience. Yep. Could be it was in a great place. It could be because it was with great people. But what was your kind of top 2 food experiences?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you 2 quite different ones. So the first one was a very short food experience. So a friend of mine was getting married, and the sort of wedding party and friends were fortunate enough to hire a catamaran in the Whitsundays of Australia and sort of sail around the beautiful part of the world for 4 or 5 days. And we were sailing between 2 islands under motor. And one of our friends decided to throw a fishing line out the back and do a little bit of trawling. And so, in amongst a couple of beers, as we were going along, 5 minutes later, suddenly the rod sort of, flicked over. We all ran over to it and pulled out about a 40, 50 centimeter tuna straight from the ocean. One of the guys that was on the boat with us happens to be a professional chef. And so I want to say that within about a minute of pulling it out, he was sort of skinning it. Within about 2 or 3 minutes, we had it on the barbecue, doing a bit of a sear. And within about 5 minutes, we were eating seared tuna fresh out of the ocean. It was a very simple meal. It all happened so quickly that we didn't even know what was kind of happening. But to me, I still remember it as one of the greatest, experiences that I had. And let me think. A second experience, actually, when I was working at Blue Socket back in the day, I did a trip over to Egypt, and I was over in Egypt, and the 4 or 5 of us that were part of this tour, we went and had dinner prepared by a Bedouin family. Just in their house, literally in their house. The women were painting henna tattoos on us and the like, and cooking this amazing meal. And it was just great to be in a completely different culture, sharing a meal with them. It was just a fantastic experience. So I really remember that experience. I'll remember it for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I've had the luxury of having food with the Bedouin, and it's great as well. But John, over to you.
Yeah, so on that line, so you've traveled the world probably several times. If you have to pick a city in the world where if you could go today and go there and eat, what would the city be, and what would the meal be?
Madrid, Spain, and croquetas. My favorite Spanish food, croquetas. It's a very easy one for me, John.
You didn't even pause to answer that question.
He did.
It was like boom, straight in.
Yeah. Look, as I think you guys know, Spain has a great variety of food, and I love the sort of simplicity of tapas and the variety of different flavors and foods that you can get, which with what is essentially a peasant food. So tapas were created effectively as small bites. Very simple food for peasants of the day, but I can assure you that the tastes are far from simple.
Solid answer.
And I'd like to thank you for coming on. Like I said, I've spent some time with you. We've talked a lot. I enjoyed your story. I think it was worth you coming on and talking to us so our listeners can understand your story. I think we've touched really the tip of the iceberg on some stuff, so maybe you'll come back again at some point. But yeah, I'd really like to thank you for coming on. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be on, and see you both soon.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.